The Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition is absolutely stunning when we talk about design and build quality. It has an incredible glossy or matte finish back depending on the version that you grab, and is an absolute beast when it comes to performance. As you guys can see, I have the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition at the top over there, but how does it stack up in cameras? We have a 20 megapixel pop-up selfie camera which can record selfie video at 1080p 30 frames per second. At the back we have 4 cameras, a 64 megapixel Sony IMX686 main sensor, 8 megapixel telephoto, 13 megapixel ultrawide, and 2 megapixel depth lens. The non-zoom edition swaps out the telephoto for a 5 megapixel macro lens and does not have optical image stabilization. But we do indeed have the zoom edition, and we're going to put it to the test here. This is an incredible device and I cannot wait to see how it stacks up in the camera department. Guys, this is TechNick, and without further ado, let's go. We're going to start over here with a 16 megapixel binned picture and move on to the 64 megapixel main photo over here. Then we're going to do a 200% crop in of each 64 megapixel photo because you guys have been begging me for more cropped photos. So I'm going to start off with a bunch of cropped. As you guys can see, it doesn't lose too much detail. It actually does a slightly better job than I have seen on recent devices such as the Realme X50 Pro. The 64 megapixel lens doesn't look quite as good as the 16 megapixel binned picture that it does take, though it does use AI, and using pixel binning, it bins 4 pixels into one to get a greater detailed shot. Remember, if you do use 64 megapixel RAW, you're looking at something more than an 8K TV resolution, so you're not really going to be able to see it anyway. That's why we use pixel binning over here. Well, that's why Redmi and other companies use pixel binning to get a greater detailed shot at a lower megapixel count. With the cropped, I'm really impressed with it. As I mentioned earlier, it does a superb job. When you do go into the crop and check my face over here, you can still see some grains on my beard there with a 200% crop in. Here's a binned pic, and now we're going to test out the portrait. We have a 2 megapixel depth sensor that works together with the 16 megapixel binned or 64 megapixel IMX686 sensor for a better depth of field shot. Here is another binned, and moving on to depth portrait over here. It does a superb job, and honestly, there are no blurry effects around the object over here. There is no obstructions from the image when going into portraits. I must say I'm really impressed with it. Some phones, even massively expensive flagship phones, struggle with edge detection around the body of the subject when trying to blur the background. Now we're going to shoot to a binned here and to ultrawide. I'm going to show you guys some ultrawide pictures over here. We have a great field of view when it comes to ultrawide, and the edges of the picture don't look too bad because the phone uses AI to kill off any blurry edges when it does take an ultrawide shot. Things look nice and natural, but when you're moving from a 64 megapixel bin to 16 megapixel shot to its 13 megapixel ultra wide, colors don't quite pop as much and things look a bit washed out. Nevertheless, it still looks absolutely phenomenal for a phone at this price point. Pretty much the cheapest Snapdragon 865 processing chip phone that you can possibly buy. And the non-zoom edition comes with a macro cam, but the zoom edition doesn't have a macro cam and doesn't have a macro mode either, so we had to use ultra wide there, and it doesn't do a great job. Going from ultra wide of this Lego statue here to 1 times binned to 3 times optical, we actually have a 3 times telephoto optical lens here. As soon as we pass that, we move on to hybrid all the way up to 30 times, which is the max zoom that you can do. And I must say, it does a pretty decent job when you are close up to a subject doing a 30 times zoom. Here is a further away object with focusing on the clock at the top there. We went from ultra wide to binned, now to 3 times optical. We're going to go to 5 times hybrid over here. As you can see, we're slightly losing a loss in quality there. Even though we have nothing greater than 3 times optical, we still stick to the telephoto lens as most companies do. 30 times hybrid really doesn't look too bad, but you can see quite a few grains there. This is the Bund area in Shanghai. Again, it is an absolutely incredible day here in Shanghai, so it made for some snazzy looking photos. 3 times optical, 5 times hybrid over there, going into 10 times hybrid. Then we're going to move on to 20 times hybrid. We start losing a lot of color and detail, especially when we hit that 30 times hybrid. I think 20 times is the sweet spot over there. Back to ultra wide, and the moon did start to come out before the day ended over here, before we go straight into night pictures. 3 times optical of the moon there, 5 times hybrid. We're getting closer. 10 times hybrid over here, and moving on to 20 times hybrid. Let's see how things do at 30 times. You're going to see quite a lot of grains over here, but it is still visible and it still does a fantastic job for this price point. Moving on to a whole bunch of 30 times hybrid shots. These photos show you the max zoom capabilities and you can still see text. I'm not going to keep you guys here all day by showing ultra wide all the way to 30 times, so I thought I'd throw in a bunch of 30 times hybrid shots over here just to show you guys the quality when zoomed in all the way. This is the zoom edition after all, and I don't know if they should have included that in the name over here. Maybe they could have said ultra. Zoom kind of makes it feel as if you're getting an incredible zoom lens and you're only getting a subpar average one. When you throw light into each of the lenses over here though, I think the telephoto handles the sun the best. And moving on to video here, we have 1080p at 60 frames per second. This is using the main camera at the back and it does a superb job. Even the stabilization isn't too bad. I actually think slightly better than the Xiaomi Mi 10 Pro. The 4K 60 frames per second, much can be the same said as opposed to the 1080p 60 frames per second. Nice and smooth, not too jittery. It looks crispy clear, and this is a 4K video, so if you're watching at 4K, you're seeing the raw details. We also have 8K at 30 frames per second, but unlike Samsung, it shoots at 30, not 24, because it upscales from 6K to 8K to maintain a smoother feel, and it does a superb job. Xiaomi have been doing this with the Mi 10 Pro as well, and I honestly think it looks and feels a lot smoother and clearer than the Samsung does with native 8K at 24 frames per second. We have 1080p at ultra wide, though things are quite shaky at 60 frames per second over here. We also have an option for 30 FPS, and at 4K we are capped at 30 frames per second when it comes to ultra wide. There is no option for 4K 60 FPS as we've seen on the Xiaomi Mi 10 Pro. When filming ultra wide, we are capped at 30 over here when filming at 4K ultra wide. When it comes to stability, when I ran over here at the Bund area in Shanghai, the stability is absolutely terrible, but throw on super steady, we dropped to 30 frames per second, but things are seriously stable. Honestly, for this price point, I cannot believe how stable things are. Now we have moving on to the night mode here. So we're going to go from a regular bind to 1 times night. 1 times meaning it is not zoomed in at all. 2 and 3 times is a zoom. Obviously more than that is also a zoom. So here is the regular shot. Here is the night shot. You can see that things are actually popping out a little bit more when it comes to detail over there. It's not so much emphasizing on the brightness, but more so on the detail. As you guys can see over there, slightly more detail, sometimes a little bit darker, but it tries to keep the colors intact. Here is 1 times night mode over here. Now we're going to shoot to 3 times optical, but guys, unfortunately, it is not a mistake at the top over there. When we shoot over to 3 times night, it says 16 megapixel bind. That is for a reason, because the telephoto cannot shoot at night, but we can still zoom in at night. And when we do use night zoom over here, night zoom functionality, then we are lacking the telephoto lens since they cannot shoot at night on the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition. So we went from ultra wide, we have no night mode for ultra wide over there, bind, then night bind over here. You can see it's not much brighter. 3 times optical over here without night mode using that telephoto lens. Now you're going to see a loss in quality over here because we are not using the telephoto lens, so we're actually using digital zoom over there when we shoot at night mode. As soon as we zoom in over there, you can see 10 times optical, well 10 times hybrid over here, and then we shoot over to 10 times night mode over here. You lose a lot of detail, but it is slightly brighter. We have no night mode options for 20 times and 30 times zoom over there. Back to ultra wide, no ultra wide night mode, so we're shooting to 16 megapixel bind over here. Then the bind night mode shot, you can see that the color light, well the color in all of the lights here look a hell of a lot better when we do put night mode on, though as soon as we start zooming, once again we lose quality, but we do gain quite a bit of color in the night mode over here, and we're losing quality because we're moving from telephoto back to the main, so we're going from a hybrid or an optical zoom to a digital zoomed image. No night mode at 20 times and 30 times once again over here. Back to the ultra wide shot over here. As you guys can see, we do not have night mode ultra wide, so we're shooting to 16 megapixel bind, then 16 megapixel bind night mode shot. You can see that the colors are really well represented when shooting into night mode, but it doesn't really make the shot look as if it is being taken in the daytime, which is what the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra does and the Oppo Find X2 Pro does, as well as the Huawei P40 Pro. They make the evening photos seem like day photos. This kind of just adds some detail to the night photo shots over here, and honestly I think it does does a superb job at it. Moving on to nighttime video over here, we are going to start with 1080p 60 frames per second main. You can see it's quite shaky over here. It doesn't really know how to handle all of this light noise in the shots over here, but it does a pretty good job recording at night. I must say it looks a hell of a lot better than other phones. I even popped my Oppo Find X2 Pro, which is currently my daily driver, next to it, and I was really surprised with how the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition actually handles video quality at night. Even with 8K, well 6K upscaled at 30 frames per second, it does a decent job. Things are kind of wonky, but it still picks up a lot of light, and it does a fantastic job when it comes to smoothness and keeping things stable. 1080p 60 frames per second ultra wide looks really shoddy. You can see a lot of gray noise in the video over here, and the same can be said with 4K 30 frames per second ultra wide. It is a slight bit smoother because we're showing less frames over here, but it does not know how to handle the noise with this ultra wide camera when shooting 4K at night. Moving on to the selfie camera, we have a 20 megapixel camera. There was a selfie regular, then a portrait, back to the main selfie over here, and then shooting on to the selfie portrait. Once again, edge detection is doing a fabulous job when it comes to shooting portrait mode over here. Just like we had with the back camera, it does a superb job with the front camera. Even with two subjects, it does seriously good things when it comes to edge detections around the subjects over here when shooting with the portrait mode on. Now we're going to shoot over to selfie video.
Yo, what's up guys, this is TechNick recording a 1080p 30 frames per second selfie video on the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition. What a mouthful to say. Let me know what you guys think of the audio and video quality. And here is a front-facing video on the K30 Pro Zoom Edition using a bokeh effect filter at 70% of strength. Let me know what you guys think of the video quality of this.
I think the bokeh effect video looked really awesome, though it is unfortunate that it is capped at 720p 30 frames per second. Moving on to evening selfie shots, they do a pretty decent job. Quite a lot of light gets let in, but the portrait mode looks absolutely shoddy. Recording video at night using that selfie camera, 1080p 30 frames per second, really doesn't do a bad job over here. I've switched it horizontally over here to landscape mode so that you guys can see more of the scenery behind me when shooting a video recording at night. And once again, 720p 30 frames per second bokeh effect video. Edge detection is not quite as good when it comes to bokeh effect in pictures, but it still does a pretty decent job, and many phones out there actually lack this feature. Overall, I'm really impressed with the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition's pictures and video quality, though not the best, definitely one of the best at this price range. Guys, this is TechNick, and I'll see you in the next one.